welcome to the stage HillVets lead protege, Andie Cassidy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, ladies. Thank you for joining us. So I'm very excited to present today a panel that we are calling a Maverick approach, harnessing 21st century media to bridge the military generational gap. And I think the topic is timely and relevant today. We've been hearing a lot about it during our HillVets lead time with this organization. So many speakers and experts during our time have indicated the differences that they're experiencing in approaching audiences of different age demographics. And so that was part of the reason that we chose this topic. And the title was also, it took a cue from a movie in the 80s that was a huge boon to Navy recruiting in particular. And so, now 40 years later, there's another one, and we are just interested in exploring those differences through time. So thank you all very much for being here. I'll do a quick intro of our panelists. You can see their full bios online, and please read them because they're all very accomplished people who are continuing to serve. First, in alphabetical order, we'll do Captain Jackie Barnum, United States Marine Corps. She is here because she is a social media influencer. She hails from the Bay Area. She's a United States Naval Academy graduate and is a Marine Corps logistics officer. She's completed multiple operational deployments in the Indo-Pacific and is currently assigned as the Assistant Logistics Officer at Marine Air Control Group 38 in Miramar, California. Mr. Rob Couture could not join us today. He's actually conducting a press conference because the PACT Act failed to pass the Senate last evening, so he's occupied with that. If he can, he will join us late, but perhaps he will not be able to do that. Second, Mr. Terrence Hayes, thank you for joining us, sir. He is currently the Director of Communications and Public Affairs.
That's Rob.
I'm sorry, Mr. Terrence Hayes, who is the Press Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. He hails from Jacksonville, Florida. He previously held Rob's job at the Veterans of Foreign Wars. So he is retired Army, over 20 years of service, and he was appointed to this current role by the President in 2021. Next, we have Lieutenant Kelly Hall Sprocky. She is also coming to us as a social media influencer. She hails from Stafford, Virginia. She's also a Naval Academy graduate. She's a human resources officer for the Navy, and she's spent 5 years in Navy recruiting already. She's a prior medical recruiter of the year and is currently assigned as the flag aide to Admiral Jen Couture, Naval Service Training Command. And then finally, we have Admiral Lex Walker. He is the commander of Navy Recruiting Command. He's a New York native who entered the Navy via the broadened opportunity for officer selection and training and attended Jacksonville University. He is a surface warfare officer by trade, having commanded USS Stockdale, DDG-106, and Destroyer Squadron 7. He's also completed multiple operational deployments and many operational Pentagon assignments as well. Most recently, he commanded Surface Warfare Officers School Command. So we do have a range of experiences here today to talk about the differences in approaching audiences through recruiting, retention, transition to veteran status, and how the different media sources that are available to us today help them to accomplish those things. So I'd like to just kick it off going back to the 40-year gap between Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick, the 40 years. How are the portrayals of military service members and veterans different from 20 or 40 or 60 years ago?
Yeah, great question. With anything, especially in media, there's evolution. And the way that servicemen and women, even our veterans, were portrayed, 4 decades ago and how they're portrayed now is completely different. 4 decades ago, people might have seen a service member as an individual who may not have been as highly educated as, their counterpart might have been on the outside. And that couldn't be, farther from the truth even then. But now you see folks in uniform like the Admiral here, like our 2 other guests there, highly educated, highly intellectual individuals. Same people, back then, 40 years ago, but because of how the military is viewed now, and through imagery, through just us as being communicators to educate folks on what you bring to the table as servicemen and women, as veterans, now they're able to see the entire gamut of what we bring to the table. So I think that's huge, and it comes from individuals like us, being able to show everyday America what we do, how we do it, what we bring to the table. And obviously you have our influencers there, they're making noise, doing their thing. And that's great because we need individuals to be able to talk to folks where they are. And when we can lean heavily on folks like influencers, where folks can see themselves in them and possibly see themselves maybe wearing that uniform, that means we're making a difference. So I think that's what I would say on that.
Admiral, what are you saying in terms of the differences between how military are depicted in media today versus 40 years ago?
I think it kind of ebbs and flows with society. So if you think back 80 years ago, World War II, Greatest Generation, a lot of pride in society, in America and the military. You go back 60 years ago, Vietnam, you start to see trust in government and in the military wane. Go back 40 years ago, the early 80s, you start to see some of that trust regained. And then 20 years ago in the post 9/11 world, you see that there's, a healthy respect for the military and all that we do. And you come to today now where you see sort of the confidence in government eroding a little bit. And with that, the same thing. And you kind of see those portrayals kind of mimic how society is feeling about its government institutions overall.
Thank you. That actually resonates with some of what we've already heard today on this very stage from the folks at Gallup who do the polling on trust in institutions. So for our virtual participants here, Lieutenant Hall and Captain Barnum, I'd like to pitch it to you slightly differently. Obviously, you weren't around doing this 40 years ago or so, but in the spaces that you occupy, what are you seeing in terms of how military and veteran communities are represented in the spaces that you occupy as social influencers?
You want to go first? Sure. So my observation is that, so Kelly and I, we are more, we're at like the tactical level in my opinion. So we're not here like at the strategic level talking about Congress moves and talking about politics and all those sorts of issues. We're just here trying to influence the lance corporal, the ensign, the second lieutenant, and showing them, hey, it's okay to talk about mental health issues. It's okay to talk about being confident, being your own person. And I think that those sort of issues weren't brought up or discussed in, 20, 40, however many years ago. Just showing our authentic selves and having that just, person to person influence. And then those do have impacts on the operational and strategic level indirectly. So we're just trying to show that it's okay to, be yourself. Like, we care about the individual. We're not doing a draft where we're just taking anyone and everyone. We actually, care about you as a person. It's okay. We're not just going to haze you and scream at you, and kind of gone are those days of the military. Now it's about, being a leader, being strong and confident and empowering others. And that's just what we're trying to do. And we're seeing incredible like results from that. Yeah, I would completely agree. And I think in the space that we take up, the two differences that I notice is, one, like where we are at on social media, the response we get from veterans who served 40, 30 years ago is typically shock. They're like shocked to see people like Jackie and I online representing the Navy and the Marine Corps. And to us, that is just further indication that we need to continue to take up this space and give this representation, because that's what our military looks like today. Our military is full of so much diversity, so many different opinions, so many different shapes, sizes, color,
you know, it's a beautiful thing. And so, like, Jackie and I are just like a tiny, tiny part of that, but we're trying to recognize and continue to emulate that in our military and hopefully inspire others who maybe are different and represent what the Navy and the Marine Corps didn't look like 50 years ago. And then in addition to that, it's really exciting to see that the military is making changes. From my previous experiences in recruiting, you know, now instead of just being like a body and meeting physical standards, they're really relying on a whole person concept. They want to see leadership, community service. They want to see individuals who are making moves in their own life, and like, how are they going to bring that into the military to make a difference? And so things have really extended past just like the basics. It's really cool to see a community of people now in this organization who are here with diverse thoughts and making a big splash.
You raised some great points, Kelly. Thank you. That actually leads me to one of my next questions, which is about the different meanings that people derive about the mission of the military and what it means to be a veteran, what it means to serve and to have served. And so what generational differences are you seeing in the populations that you are trying to reach, that you're trying to serve, in terms of how they view the mission, such as it is for the VA or the Navy, DOD writ large? And Terrence, maybe I could start with you.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting dynamic. I think the interesting part is that it kind of just differs with the various demographics, how they view the department. And that's one of the things that we're challenged with, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to educate today's serviceman and woman what their Department of Veterans Affairs is while they're in uniform, not once they take their uniform off. They need to know everything that's available to them and what the VA offers them the moment that they switch from in-service to veteran status. So in order to do that, we have to really patch into every means of communication we can to reach as many servicemen and women as possible and their families. So the younger soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guardsmen may not really understand the whole dynamic of the VA and healthcare after I leave the service, or these benefits that I may potentially be or have readily accessible to me once I depart. But the more that we are able to communicate those items to them on various different platforms or in concert with the Department of Defense, it enables them and equips them to have better knowledge and to be able to make better decisions when it comes to their benefits and their health care package as they move forward in their life cycle of their service. So I think, again, it just varies, because your older serviceman and woman, they're thinking about the VA and health care after I take off this uniform, because, right now I have health care, tomorrow I may not, especially if I don't retire. So how does that look? So the more that, again, we're able to equip them with that knowledge, the better they will be and the best decisions they will be able to make for themselves and their families moving forward.
That's a great point. I know when I was 20 years old, I was not thinking about health insurance.
Exactly. As a young, soldier, you hear VA, I don't know what that means. I'm not even thinking about that. I'm thinking about today, tomorrow, and maybe next year. But, again, as we educate them, they can see what's readily available to them in the future.
Thanks, Terrence. Sir, you are working with that younger population, so what are you seeing in terms of differences as they approach the mission?
No, it's very interesting because, when you look at the concept of service, the sister to that word is sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And as you look at a currently serving young man or woman versus someone who's a veteran, the temporal nature of that experience kind of changes how individuals think about service. But in the end, I think that there's a common, connective tissue, if you will, about doing something beyond oneself. And I think that's what really draws people to service and keeps people in service, either in uniform or out of uniform. But what I appreciate about this generation more so than my own is the desire to understand the context and the texture of that service. You know, we hear a lot about this generation asking questions about why, because of how they identify and want to understand the value proposition of service, as opposed to just blindly serving. But I think, excuse me, the value of service is the same, but how we each look at it, it differs with time and age.
Thank you, sir. And Lieutenant Sprocky, you've spent a long time in recruiting. What have you experienced in the demographic that would be your target audience?
Yes, two things. One, I'd say when I first started recruiting, I came at it from what I thought was the same reason why my own dad joined the military 30 years ago. And I was like, oh, everybody wants to join the military and, like, you know, they want to be part of this organization because of the benefits and the stability. Like, that was the number one reason why my parents were looking to talk with a recruiter. So that was one of the biggest mistakes I made first walking in the door when I started recruiting was this is what everybody's number one goal is. And then when I figured out, when I'm talking to these super educated, bright young men and women who I was recruiting med students because I was a medical recruiter, they weren't necessarily looking for that. They were looking for something that was going to set them apart, what was going to challenge them. They want to be part of a team. How can they further their opportunities? And what I noticed now being outside of medical recruiting, this is really similar to a lot of the people we talk to online. You know, they're not asking Jackie and I, hey, what's the pay scale like? Or what's the bonuses? They want to hear personal experiences about how the military has shaped us. And that's pretty incredible because people are coming into the service knowing that they want to be a part of the mission because it's going to extend their aperture and their opportunities. And so I feel like no longer is it really about how do I change myself and mold myself to fit this skeleton of a person that meets military service and standards. And it's now, how can I bring diverse thought and benefit the military with my unique views? And I think that that's pretty incredible.
The only thing that I would add, just from a social media standpoint, and what I think is a big difference in the generations, is that before the opportunities that were available, a lot of, at least for me, I haven't felt this way, 5 years ago. I just felt very in the dark, and I didn't know who to ask or where to look for answers to questions. And the answer used to be like, oh, well, there's a MAR admin for that. Go look it up. Or there's a pub for that, or whatever. Go read about it. But now, with social media, and us trying to break these programs down to the level at which a high schooler can understand, or why would a Lance Corporal care about this? And that information is just so much more available. So if someone was wanting to know what the pay scale is, I know exactly someone on social media who talks about those issues and makes it understandable to all service members and makes it accessible and approachable. And I think that is just a big difference that I've been seeing, is just that this information that has always been there, we are just, amplifying it and making it approachable so that service members feel comfortable taking advantage of programs that exist, or, knowing about what benefits they have.
So speaking of the different age groups and some of the different challenges with reaching them, especially with regard to veterans, Terrence, what kinds of challenges are you seeing as new media become available to disseminate a message, policy changes? What kind of challenges are you seeing in communicating with your audiences?
Yeah, communication is an ever-evolving, resource or tool, so you have to be able to jump on those platforms that your audience, your customer, your stakeholders happen to be on. If we find that, a large population of our folks are on Facebook and we're not on Facebook, that's a huge fail for us. If we see that folks are using Twitter and that's how they get their news and their information, and we're not on Twitter, that's a huge fail for us. So again, what we're learning is that we have to be where people are. We have to meet them where they are. So we're on all the major social media channels right now. Heck, we're even exploring, ways that we can capture things on TikTok, So again, being where folks are, so they can get the information that they need. Everybody's not going to just go to va.gov. We would love them to go to va.gov to get all the information and the resources, because that's the central hub. But we know, again, that different demographics get their information in various different ways. So we have to be able to funnel those pockets of information in those platforms, and then ultimately get them to come to that central hub that is va.gov. So that's the challenge that we're faced with right now, just engaging folks where they are, trying to find out where they are, and ensuring that how we present the information to them is how they want and need to receive it.
So are you finding yourself using multiple modes of communicating that same information? For example,
yes.
I know my dad's a veteran. He is not on Twitter.
Oh, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And that's the wonderful thing about our digital media and engagement team. We have a wide variety of skill sets, experience levels, ages, different education backgrounds, and we're able to tap into those professionals to give us the advice that we need in order to make sure that, again, we're reaching those stakeholders where we need to meet them, and we're communicating. That's the key part. Again, it's not just about being on the platform. I can be on a platform, but if I'm spitting out jargon on a platform that just completely misses the mark, let's look at Facebook, for example. If we put out information on Facebook and it's like paragraphs on paragraphs of information, people are not going to digest that. We know that. People are in that quick snippet type of world now where video is key. Small 15-second, 30-second videos, where you're able to pull in and gain their interest immediately first. And then on the back end, boom, we can put that information about VA and what actually, we're trying to get them to understand. So again, it's just ever evolving. We're learning as we go. And that's the beautiful thing about this communication career field.
And Admiral Walker, I know that the Navy just recently abandoned everything except digital in terms of recruiting approaches. So how are you finding that?
No, I think, I often say to my team, one of the biggest mistakes in communication is believing that it's happened. And so when you go out and communicate, not only is it important to communicate, effectively and follow up on that communication to make sure that not only was it received, but it was understood. But then, you have to communicate in the right venues, in the right timing, with the right words. So we're experiencing that very much as well. When you look at the Navy demographic, we have 17-year-olds up to 60-year-olds. So, where Facebook resonates with some audiences, old folks like me, it doesn't resonate with Kelly, for instance. So we're in Snapchat there and other places, and making sure that the paragraph that I might want to consume is the, 180 characters that she wants to consume. Or 240 now, I guess it is. 240. Sorry.
That's great. So a couple of questions specific maybe to Jackie and Kelly in terms of the space where you're operating as social media influencers with a big presence and a powerful platform, I might add. But neither of you currently work in recruiting or marketing or social media full-time. This is in addition to your day jobs, which I might add are fairly demanding. So what inspired each of you to launch and run your social media platforms during your spare time?
Jackie's handing the mic to me because when I first started this, it was pretty unprecedented. Back in 2017, when I first started in recruiting, we weren't on the social media space pretty much whatsoever. And I was in charge of officer recruiting out in the Midwest. And I came there, 23 years old, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and I said, why aren't we on Facebook? Why aren't we on Instagram? And the other officers around me were like, that's a cute idea, but we don't do that. And I was like, but that's where our audience is. We're recruiting my peers, essentially. I'm 23 years old. And then when I became a recruiter, that was the first thing I did. I made a Facebook account. And I branded it Lieutenant Hall. At the time, I wasn't married, and I posted a video. And I recorded a video from my office about medical programs and this medical scholarship called HPSP. Within 4 days, this video got 200,000 views on Facebook. And I believe the number one thing there is relatability. One thing that Jackie and I have both learned, not to speak for you, but the reason why our platforms do so well online is because our generation no longer really wants to see this super marketed ad. They want to see real people talking about real things in a real setting. And that is how the journey started for me, and my chain of command was really supportive. But I've continued because personal branding is so key in the communication arena, whether or not you're working for huge corporate companies or a small business or the military. People want to follow people. And we kind of like fell into this position because we were vulnerable in sharing our stories. But even now, I'm not even in recruiting anymore, but I've kept it up because it's such a powerful tool that people see someone they can relate to, and they're like, maybe I'm not going to be exactly Kelly Sprocky, but her story aligns a little bit to mine, and it's showing me how I can do this and how this applies to me. So personal branding, I think, is like where most businesses and marketing is turning to, and we just need to keep up in that space.
So my favorite saying now that my mentor told me is, if you see it, you can be it. So that just like really, once he said that to me, I was like, oh my gosh, like I think that's why Kelly fortunately really encouraged me to really take that leap. But at the time, I remember we were talking, and there was no major or lieutenant colonel female officer who is in this space. So, I mean, there's a huge gap. And so when I was a lieutenant, I had no one really to be looking up to, or, that I was like, oh, I want to be that. Like, even women majors in general in the Marine Corps are literally called unicorns because there's just not that many of them, to look up to. So if I can be that first battalion commander who has had a social media presence, then I can be somebody that others can look up to, can ask questions to. I can be that, facilitator for mentors and answer those questions and be that person that I just didn't have, honestly, and I was too afraid to really ask questions at that age. So I'm just trying to fill that gap and represent people who do identify with me and are inspired to follow our footsteps.
And I'd say that's why we keep it up too, because sometimes, Jackie and I have full-time jobs and we have a life and we're best friends and, our calendars are full, but there are times we show up to social media and we have 20 messages from people just looking for a little bit of advice or encouragement or potentially reaching out for a mentor. And I feel guilty sometimes not showing up to Instagram that evening because there's people who truly are just trying to find some sort of guidance, and I want to help them. So now I see this as like, it's not about us. Like, we are not like, let's be the face of the military. This is our number one goal. It's because we're truly like realizing we are helping people. And if that's like a small portion and role we can play in someone's career or life, that's the biggest honor.
I'd like to talk about whether, Terrence particularly, if you are seeing veterans communicate with each other in the same space that Captain Barnum and Lieutenant Sprocky are occupying right now. Are you seeing a similar kind of movement among the veteran community?
Yeah. Again, things are shifting. Evolution is crazy. But yeah, we're seeing folks, on Twitter communicating with us, as opposed to maybe calling us. As opposed to maybe sending us an email. They're shooting us notes or instant messages via Twitter or on our LinkedIn sites. So again, I think that, us knowing that we have to be nimble in our approach as well of how we, again, present the information to them. So this generation of veteran is more savvy. They're using, as the ladies just said, they're going to reach out to folks who they relate to. So with that said, we have to make sure that our materials are relatable, and we have to relate to them when they're jumping on these platforms. It's it's like anything with communication. You never want to have communication be a one-sided conversation or a one-sided dialogue, where that's what a website basically is. It's just, I'm communicating at you. And the valuable thing about social media, and as these ladies are doing exceptionally well, is that it affords that dialogue, that back and forth conversation, to where now not only am I receiving information from you, but also I can tell you what may be troubling me or what I may be faced with, or how I can help another teammate as well with the information that you're presenting to me. So I think that's the wonderful thing about these tools and resources, especially when they're used responsibly, because that's the key part. And I'm sure these ladies know that to a T. They're using these platforms responsibly. They're not just jumping on, Instagram to just make these, crazy videos or crazy messages. They have a strategy behind what they're doing and a means behind who they're communicating to. And we're doing the same thing because, again, it's like a saying that someone once told me, you either get on the train or get ran the hell over. And that's what it is with this social media world we're in. Either we got to get on board or we got to just move out the way. And if we move out the way, our veterans are the ones who are being, penalized by that. So we have to get into those spaces and have that open back and forth dialogue.
That's a great point. And I like, you brought up a couple times this kind of evolutionary approach. And if I could ask you to kind of like step away from your VA role for a second and just speak to us as a veteran and someone who has done work with the VFW and other veteran support organizations, I wonder if you could talk to us about the challenges of continuing for veterans to continue to find a sense of community in the social media space, like the community that I've seen just doing the homework for this, because I admittedly am not a native in that space myself, but it seems like there's really community just growing up around that. And I'm wondering what you're seeing in that realm with the veteran community. It's not VFW halls anymore per se for the younger generations of veterans, but is there an opportunity?
You're absolutely right. I mean, today's veterans, aren't really, it's because everybody's so super busy, as these ladies just said. We're all super busy. We may not have that opportunity to leave our 9-to-5s and then go home, and then we may have our families, or we may be in school, or we may have other projects. So there's some servicemen and women out there and veterans out there right now who have side hustles and stuff like that. So they're doing all these different things. Where do they get to fit in that now I need to go to, the American Legion Hall or to the VFW, local VFW post to actually congregate with my, my peers? Social media affords us that opportunity to jump into a group or something like that. I mean, I'm in several different veteran groups from when I served with certain individuals. We started, back then, and we're still in constant communication there. But it gives us that opportunity to communicate with those individuals and continue that bond. Classic example, there's some folks who have created some really thorough and detailed veterans-centric Facebook groups. And they put out valuable information on these groups. And they have like thousands upon thousands of folks joining these groups to understand, how do I use the GI Bill? How do I navigate the VA healthcare system? How do I even enroll, once I leave service and get into that process? How do I use the VA home loan? These are all conversations that are being had in these various different groups. And these folks are really taking advantage of that because, again, they're hearing from their peers. They're not hearing from, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, on this. They're not hearing from other high-level leadership on why you should take advantage or how you should use this. They're chatting with folks who actually have taken advantage of these programs, used them, and they can tell them and have those real detailed and open and honest conversations about what works, what doesn't work, and how does it fit for me.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to get some notes on what those pages are as I approach my own transition. Admiral Walker, something that obviously has been in the news a lot is the challenges services are having with regard to recruiting, also retention, but recruiting is really in the spotlight this week. Can you share an example of a successful engagement with an audience you were trying to reach to recruit and we're having trouble reaching versus using traditional media, but you experience more success with non-traditional. Can you talk to us about that?
No, absolutely, ma'am. I believe that one of the good things that has come out of the pandemic is our acceptance of a more ready social media environment. And so as we were already moving into the digital space, the pandemic accelerated that for us. And so what it did was it forced us out of some of the traditional marketing and advertising tools, typical, TV ads, movie ads, print ads, purely into a digital space. And where we've found our most success is actually on Snapchat, because it allows for that interaction, and it's what we call a full funnel engagement apparatus, in the sense that we can create awareness at the upper funnel and conversion down at the lower funnel to get people in, and we can get more bang for the buck in that environment. And so, that platform has allowed us to have more success. And then going back to Kelly's point about authenticity, we do other things like Faces of the Fleet or Sailor Verses that also help us relay our stories in an authentic fashion that resonates with the younger crowd, as well as some of our senior folks as well.
That Sailor Verses, I've seen. Could you describe for the audience what that is, sir?
Absolutely. So when we look at Sailor Verses, we realize that influencers of, Gen X or older, we typically look for movie stars and other things, but our Gen Z, our centennials, look to social media influencers. And so what we've done in some instances is pair that influencer up with a like rating inside the Navy. So if you're an influencer who is a chef, well, we invite you on board a ship to come cook with our culinary specialist, and we have a Sailor Versus, and we've done that with musicians and other professions as well to have that relatability.
That's a great example of thinking outside the box to kind of get a whole new swath of society, because it's so important that our military looks like the country that we serve. So I think Absolutely. That's a really important way to reach new audiences. So getting back to our social media influencers here, Jackie and Kelly, can you talk about how you operate? Because DoD social media guidance is a little ambiguous. There's some gray area. How have you been able to get your leadership on board when you find you're working for somebody that maybe doesn't inhabit the social media space like you do?
Yeah, we have vastly different experience in this. I'd say first, and I think both of us, what guidance there is, we pretty much know by heart, any public affairs guidance, making sure we're following the rules. And I think my intention every single time I show up to social media is truly, how can I set the best example for the Navy? There is sometimes that added pressure there. You want to make sure that you are squared away. I mean, followers will notice if my ribbon rack is even a 1/4 inch off. Like, they're like, hey, that's wrong. So you want to set that great example. But Jackie can speak a lot more on like the policies that she's been following. I typically go to her sometimes as a reference. But I'd say number one, like what is given, what policies there are, that we know those by heart. But number two, for chain of command support, I think it started with like already having that sustained superior performance in your career and that trust with your chain of command. They may not always understand what you're doing, but they understand you as an officer and that you have the best intention and that you're just trying to do something new and different. And it's been really empowering for me that every commanding officer I've worked with since 2016 has given me that opportunity. They kind of take a chance on me and they say, I don't really know what this Facebook or Instagram thing is, but let's try it. And then when it yields results, they're like, wow, like I really trusted you there. I didn't really know how this was going to go. And even now in my current role as a flag aide, I think it came from, I knew that my role was shifting. I'm no longer working in recruiting. I'm here representing an admiral and this huge domain. And so I actually deleted my recruiting account And I only ran my current personal account because that wasn't my job anymore. My job was to be the flag aide to her. And so, initially she was kind of like, yeah, you have a really large presence. Like, what's this about? But as our times progressed together, even she has seen, as we continue to visit universities and ROTC units and JROTC programs, and we have these discussions on diversity, equity, and inclusion, that this space we're occupying is reaching that audience. So even though she may not be an SME in it, she's trusting me because she knows that there's a larger goal and bigger picture here, and that I am going to continue to be the best example possible. I'll turn it over to Jackie because her experience is a little bit different than mine.
So my chain of command, my last unit, I had a weird situation where basically like people would send my boss my content and basically say to him, like, what are you doing about this? In such a negative way. So other people established like a narrative for me and got into my chain of command's mind that what I was doing was bad. So when I got pulled in and I was asked about it, and I had to explain myself essentially. But the question I always go to is, well, are these, opinions, or am I violating an order? Like, is there something in the UCMJ that I'm violating? Like, I know the answer to that question. Like, I know what the left and right lateral limits are. So anytime I get questioned, my response is just like, well, like, I know I'm making a difference and I know the impact that I'm making. And I'm sorry you feel that way, honestly, but that never really went anywhere with my chain of command. At the most, they just were like, ignored it and let me do my thing. My current command that I'm at now is very interested in what I'm doing, and they're very aware of it. But kind of what Kelly was alluding to is, COs care about the mission. They don't care about social media and what I'm doing in like recruiting efforts and, all that. My CO recently sat me down and was like, we support everything you're doing as long as it doesn't detract from your job, So, now I'm in this back in my logistics job and I am having to navigate, okay, how do I balance these types of commitments or, continuing my social media presence while being a really good logistics officer that I know I am, but I just haven't proven that yet to them. So this is more of like a TBD for me question. I am like currently facing this, where they're aware of it and they're kind of a little wary of it. Cause again, like Kelly said, is they don't totally understand. So it's just a matter of, proving that you are competent and really good at your job, and while also, being strong on social media and pushing that message.
I think also one thing that helps Jackie and I is that we are very open to feedback. So if there is an actual issue raised, I think our initial response isn't to be defensive. It's to be like, okay, can you show me where like this is violating something, or can you tell me why this isn't welcomed? And if it's actually helping us continue to further this platform in a positive way, I welcome it. I really do, because that, again, this guidance is very ambiguous. So, we're kind of building the plane as we fly it in this space because there's not really a ton of other people out there doing it. But ultimately, I think for both of us, just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong. And, we both, I keep a folder on my phone of screenshots from people who have reached out to me about how we've been able to impact them, or like they're in the Navy because they saw my post a year and a half ago or something like that. And those are the conversations and the dialogue I'm willing to have with Chain of Command because, we're here to just honestly like make a difference in a positive way.
Just one more thought, but for when I post, and probably you too, is like I call it the lowest common denominator rule, where I have to assume that everybody looking at my post is the most unhappy, bitter, angry person who is looking for something wrong. So whether that's something wrong with my uniform, if I'm saying something incorrect or misrepresenting something, I have to assume that there are people out to get me, which there are. I literally had a complaint filed against me because of my Instagram, and I had to undergo a horrible situation with that, where I knew in my heart I wasn't breaking the rules, but there are people that will weaponize the complaint system. So you just have to be very, run every post through every single checklist of, am I marginalizing somebody? Am I being, offensive to anybody? Am I leaving somebody? You really have to filter, because with one touch of a button, something that we say and do is seen by 50,000 people in a matter of an hour. So just with that in mind, you just have to really make sure you know the rules and follow them, and just, yeah.
Thank you, ladies, both for sharing some of those challenges. Really admired that you continue to persist and try and reach the audiences that you do in a positive way. And I'd like to turn that into another question. So, gentlemen, I know that, we're just talking about challenges. Can you think of examples of where you were experiencing a challenge, maybe communicating something for the secretary or reaching an audience where you were having trouble, but you were able to bridge that using kind of a non-traditional means?
I'm happy to start. So, a couple years ago, we launched our esports team, Goats in Glory, and to try to be in the room where it happens, if you will, and appreciating that was a space that we weren't in. Almost immediately upon launching that, we were derided pretty heavily in the traditional media, but as well as on Twitch, the streaming platform. And so because of that, we had to pause, kind of regroup and decide again how we were going to populate that space. And so we had to work on our communication strategy, train our esports members on how to engage in that space. And since then, we've relaunched Goats in Glory, and now the reception that they get in the esports realm is pretty positive. So that was an opportunity where we started off, recognized relatively quickly that we missed the mark, and then had to regroup and go out again.
That's a great example. Thanks, Admiral.
Yeah, I don't really have any solid examples, to be quite honest with you. One of the things, and I'm glad the ladies brought it up, is that when you're in the social world, you have to really be on your P's and Q's. And one of the things that we live by, in my line of business, is that we're in constant communication with the lawyers. I'm just being quite honest with you, as transparent as possible. Whether that's from our social media posts, while we have, several of my teammates who have the ability to press send and that kind of thing, nothing is sent without, a solid checklist of folks kind of going through that process. And it doesn't slow up the process without question. But when you're at this level and, the cabinet member level where, anything that goes out, that is a direct reflection of the secretary, which then in turn is a direct reflection of the president. So we have to be totally mindful of anything that we're publishing on any of our platforms, because as my boss has said several times, Secretary McDonough, no matter if I'm saying it in my capacity as the press secretary, or it's being put out on Twitter, or it's on the Facebook site or on a blog, that's coming from him. It doesn't have to have his name there, but he's the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and anything that goes out publicly is of him. So with that said, we know that we have to triple check everything that we do, everything that we put out, and trust me, we work hand in hand with our legal folks, our legislative folks, and several of our senior advisors who, especially when you're talking about policies and regulations and things that impact today's veterans, we have to be in concert with all those individuals before we just hit that send button.
That's a great point, that you have kind of a whole team.
Yes.
Just to kind of keep in those left.
Yeah,
and
so
right.
I can imagine the level of pressure that the ladies have, that, hey, they have to have that knowledge within themselves And as they said, there's people online who are trying to sharpshoot everything they do. And with that known to them, as long as you remain on your P's and Q's and you know your left and right limits of what you can and can't do, and don't ever step across that line, you'll be in a safe space. And like I said, fortunately for me, we have that team. When you're an influencer and you're kind of on an island to yourself, and then you're in a new space that, an organization is still learning about, and still is kind of like, kind of hesitant with kind of going, all the way in on, they have to do what they have to do to protect themselves, one, but also, I put it here like this: if they are successful, the service is successful. DOD is successful, and it allows more folks to use those platforms to engage newer audiences. But if they take one misstep, then we all know how that goes being in service, that they'll immediately try to shut it down, and not see the still positives behind it, or how we can fix something or system behind it to still be able to communicate with folks. And that would be an epic fail if that happens.
That's a great point. And, when you put yourselves out there on social media, you're inviting a whole, like, that back and forth conversation,
right.
And it's
right.
safe to snipe from home.
Yeah, I mean, today's folks, they hear social media, they hear influencer, they think people like Kim Kardashian. They think like, I'm going to throw somebody out there that many people might not know, like Young Miami. Folks like that who are in this space where, they're putting out videos and, they're comical, or, it's kind of like reckless abandonment, sometimes. That's not what these ladies are trying to use their platforms for. They're using it to benefit today's generation of serviceman and woman. And when people can understand that and take out these influencers on this side are doing this for these reasons, then they can use that as a force multiplier.
Those are great points, Terrence. Thank you. Ladies, I'd like to ask you, from the benefit of hindsight of your own challenges, or maybe from observing some missteps that you've seen with, official Navy or VA accounts in the social media space, what recommendations do you have to kind of broaden their use of that space officially, or to take advantage of that space?
The first piece of recommendation that I would give is know your audience. It is impossible to make everybody happy or to have everyone agree with your post. And it's so easy as humans to just focus on the negative feedback or the negative comments. But that is time wasted, because at the end of the day, you're not going to just change tons of people's minds, but you are changing minds of people who aren't, vocally against you. You're doing good things for people. So as long as you know who your audience is and stick to that as much as you can, and try not to get bogged down and discouraged with the naysayers and the people who want to tear you down and make you stop. It takes a lot of practice in that. It's easier said than done, for sure. But that's what I would say. It's the first piece of recommendation.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Kelly?
Well, we could probably go back and forth for a long time. We probably could record a whole podcast episode on this, to be honest. I just had someone reach out to me recently, a graduate of the Naval Academy, and he was like, I know I'm not your target audience. I'm a male. I'm already in, that sort of thing. And I was like, no, everyone's welcome. But he said, I want to do what you do. I want to start a podcast. I want to talk about my experiences. And I'd say first, empower yourself with the regulations that are out there. Because anytime we're challenged, we can be like, actually, it says this. We're following those. Second, I always keep in mind, every time I post, my boss is most likely watching. And whether it's your boss, your mom, when I used to train my recruiters on social media, I'd say, think that your grandma is online. Set that example. And so I want to make sure that, that you're realizing you're not just posting, to an empty room. You're posting for thousands and thousands of people to see. So keep that in mind. But then The tangible piece of advice I would give would be, one, personal connection is huge online. If you could copy and paste your content into someone else's account, you're not doing it right. It should be specific to you, particular to you, to your story. There should be a need for it, a need for, whatever you're sharing, and a spot for you in the market. And I think that's why Jackie and I have honestly kind of just landed and gotten lucky in this space, because there really wasn't a lot of other people out there sharing their stories and sharing that vulnerability from their perspective. Everything that we post online, we have an annotation that says, these views are my own and not a reflection of the DoD. So keep that in mind too, that it's your journey, it's your story, but definitely let those guidelines and that support be your guidepost as you move forward in social media.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. I would also just like to point out for the audience that Lieutenant Sprocky is on leave, so her dedication is noted. I'm not sure if you are Captain Barnum, but I know that Sprocky is. So that's admirable. Before we close and go to the question and answer section, I wanted to go towards a more lighthearted round of questions, and that is related to Top Gun. And I would like to get the panel's opinion on which was the better movie, the original or Top Gun Maverick, and why. Perhaps starting with maybe Admiral.
So I'll start by saying I think they're both fantastic, but I'm going to go with Maverick. And I'm going to go with Maverick for principally one reason only, because of the diversity representation in that movie. Going back to Captain Hall's point that if you can see it, you can be it. And so what young men and women are able to see in that depiction is someone that looks like them or close to like them. So it plants a seed that I can do that too.
Yeah, I feel like you guys are like trapping me as the lone soldier up here. Like it's the Army-Navy game all over again. And, as the Admiral said, I do believe the second movie was pretty amazing. And again, as he stated so eloquently, because of just the imagery behind it. And when you can see diverse characters and you're able to delve into those characters, people want to be a part of that. So the first movie was excellent too, without question. But to see the time that surpassed between the first one and where we are today, and seeing that finished product, because sometimes you can do sequels and it can go sideways. And but this one actually hit the mark without question.
Awesome. Thanks, Terrence. Ladies?
I'm just going to go real quick. I might get canceled, but I haven't seen either. I just want to say that really quickly, and I'll...
I did PCS recently, though. We'll put that out there. Yeah. Very busy people. I knew you hadn't seen it. I couldn't wait for you to admit that. I was going to call you out if you didn't. And I would agree completely with the rest of the panelists. The second one, for sure, for all the reasons Admiral Walker stated about the diversity. And I'd also like to say, from my perspective, I felt this sense of pride while I was watching it, not for myself, but for my peers that are aviators. I was too short to fly. I couldn't fly, nor could I ever have done what they did in that movie. But I was like, I have peers out there doing this. They are, they studied, they're excellent, they're incredible aviators and officers. And that was just so surreal to see, because I feel like they really touched on the teamwork aspect of it and the brother sisterhood aspect of it as well that you get when you go into the military. So I was just so excited for all of my peers out there flying, because I'm I know you're not starring in this movie right now, but you were starring in the real fleet where it matters, and I think that's incredible.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Kelly. And I think you have some homework, Captain Barnum.
We're watching it tonight on leave.
All right, audience Q&A time.
Hannah would like to know, could you speak to the impact of social media on gender integration in the military? It's so amazing to see women service member influencers on Instagram, but there is also the vet bro Twitter, there we go, culture where women often encounter backlash or negative masculinist assumptions of military identity on social media?
I was actually going to turn that over to the ladies first,
Okay.
but no, I do think, it's always a challenge when we look at the military, which is still predominantly male. But I think what the social media space has allowed us to do is get more voices out there, get more authentic voices out there to communicate and demonstrate the multiple ways that we are making progress and that all types of people can be successful. It's a journey. It's not a nascent journey, and we're making progress. We still have a long way to go, but the more voices that are seen and the more faces that are heard that look different help us continue on that journey.
Great. And so, Terrence, I heard in that comment something about vet bro mil Twitter. Are you seeing anything in the veteran spaces on social media?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that I'm not. I just probably am not up to speed too much on that specific question. However, I will say this. The Department of Veterans Affairs is probably the most diverse organization in our federal government. I challenge anybody to come over to our department and just see our leadership and the wonderful clinicians and professionals, leading various different portfolios at the department. I mean, we have amazing women leaders. Our actual number 3 in charge of the department, our chief of staff, is an African-American woman, former soldier, served with her when I was in the Army, public affairs officer. Our number 2 in charge is an African-American man, our deputy secretary. And then we have various different women and men leaders from various different backgrounds, various different religions, race, ages, sexual orientations, you name it, leading VA, making an impact for today's veteran that represents our society. And these are societal norms, unfortunately, that this particular, questioner was basically getting the question across, is that we're having some challenges in everyday society because of this. So, and it reflects in our military, reflects in our veteran population, unfortunately. But we're going to continue to do what we do, raise those wonderful leaders and valuable leaders on these platforms. So again, that people can see people like them in these spaces, and then they can trust those individuals. And when they can trust and see those folks, then we've made progress, and we're going to continue to make that progress as we move along.
Thank you. Ladies, would you like to chime in on anything you're observing?
For the vet bros, they are in the minority. There are so many more men and service members and veterans and citizens who are supportive. Maybe they're silent about it and they just do give us a like, but that's still support. The vet bros are the people who are, don't like what we're doing. There's not that many of them, honestly, and they're just louder. So that's kind of another piece of advice, going back to your earlier question, is just keeping that in mind. And if there's different ways to respond, of course, and there's empowerment and different types of responses to that. Being silent, ignoring it, or defending yourself. But as soon as I double down and I start demanding, I'm a woman and you need to respect me, or I'm an officer, so you need to respect me, then I'm losing everybody. So you just have to be able to compartmentalize those opinions. And again, we're not here to change their minds. We're here to influence this whole other demographic and set an example for these people who do want to hear what we have to say. So just remember that, those opinions really are not many of them. They just stick in our minds and we obsess over them because we want to appease everybody, make everybody happy. But that's impossible. And they're just loud and make themselves loud.
Do you have anything to add, Kelly?
The haters will always be louder than the lovers. That's one of my favorite quotes that I always remember. And, it's a different military today. Like she said, I think more often than not, like, men are our allies. I have a wonderful relationship with my peers and the men I work with. And there's, these different groups or Facebook groups or Twitter accounts or whatever that, might make fun of us or make fun of, female service members or say that our standards are different. But ultimately, again, it goes back to that intention. Like, your heart, what you're showing up for, you know that you're doing the best you can and you're setting the right example and that you aren't cutting any corners. And ultimately, that is what our military is now. It's all different shapes, sizes, backgrounds, genders, and we are working together as a team. And this diversity of thought is ultimately what's going to put us in a better warfighting space. And if people can't recognize that, that's really their own fault. So continue and realize, like, you have a lot of cheerleaders, and that's mostly, like, what drives us and keeps us going.
Good afternoon, panel. John Puddles-Myers, active duty Air Force. We try to keep this unsuccessfully long-winded because I was passionate about this panel because I was a recruiter flight chief, and marketer for the Air Force 2016, 2019. So I'm both encouraged by what I'm hearing today, breath of fresh air, but I'm also discouraged by personally what I see and what I know from some of the behind the scenes when it comes to military recruitment, specifically Air Force recruitment, but I had many peers, Navy, Army, otherwise. So the first part of the question is for the Admiral specifically. When can we expect the services to completely divest from our legacy marketing efforts that I view are far too costly, have virtually zero conversion, at least not measurable conversion? You can't track it. So just garbage ROI, and they only speak to propensed audiences that you don't need to market to anyway. Like, basically, I'm speaking NASCAR. I spent 2 years trying to kill NASCAR, which there's so many legal and other nonsense that goes with that. I tried to get all that money put into the NBA's E-League, but yeah, it went nowhere. Also, what I was disappointed by, once I left, I was the first person in the Air Force paid to get a digital marketing certification. I stood up every digital marketing effort for every squadron of the Air Force recruiting service. We had wild success for 2 years. We got comfortable. I left. The commander left. It withered on the vine. So I was highly disappointed that what I thought my legacy was for Air Force recruiting just died, like literally within a span of a year. So that's the first part of the question. Second part of the question is for the entire panel. If you could unilaterally direct where marketing funds go, which are quite limited if you don't know, our military recruitment dollars are actually very, very limited when you think of the scope of what they're doing. If you could control where that money went, where would you send it? Over.
So I'll take the front end of that question first, in the sense that we have pretty much moved all of our marketing and advertising into the digital space because we do appreciate that the ROI and the cost per impression is relatively low in traditional media. And so we are constantly answering this question from senior officers, some retirees, or some veterans as well, as how come I never see any TV ads? How come I never see any ads? And that's because we're out of that space, because we do understand that the ROI, the return on investment, is relatively limited. So we work with Jammers, the Joint Advertising Marketing Research Service, that kind of lets us know where our audiences are and our target demographics are, and that pretty much drives us towards where we decide to spend those precious dollars. As you fully appreciate, and my panel appreciates, there's never enough money to get to all the audiences that we want to, but we are focused principally on our target demographic of 17 to 21-year-olds. So to that end, as you look at, if I only had $1 to spend, where would I spend it? I would spend it in the digital space, targeting that demographic, because the biggest challenge that we have right now is that as we look at our society and we look at the exposure that young men and women have to the military, it continues to decrease. The greatest generation is literally dying out. Our parents, folks my age, you have fewer and fewer of those who have served in the military. When you look at our infrastructure, We have consolidated that as well for efficiencies. So the literal number of touch points that a young man or woman has to engage with their military today is very few. So that $1 in the digital space allows me to reach so many different target demographics. So that's where I would spend my $1. But going back to your original question, we do look at return on investment, and we do shift away from the things that are not giving us that bang for the buck that we hope for.
And the second question, it's a delicate balancing act where you're putting your dollars at to reach your audience. For the Department of Veterans Affairs, veterans in general, our audience is everywhere. We have to be in the TV space. We have to be on the digital space. We have a huge amount of folks who are in the rural space, folks that we just can't tap into. How do we tap into those folks who live in those rural areas? We have to figure those, means of marketing to them as well. So, again, you have younger veterans, you have older veterans, veterans of different education, that kind of thing. So we're always constantly meeting together as a team and basically getting analysis as well to figure out where folks are, so that way we can invest our monies into those areas to market to those veterans better. So, because anytime we get sometimes complaints from veterans that, we're not on TV enough. We get complaints from veterans that, we don't have enough ads maybe in the paper, or that, we're not pushing out, like old school mailers out enough. So it's a constant balancing act, reevaluating everything as we continue to evolve, and to ensure that we're trying to meet the mark as much as possible for all of our veterans, no matter where they are.
I have a note on this, and this is Admiral Walker's wheelhouse. I'm not going to tell him how to spend his money. However, one of the things that blows me away is what Jackie and I do is completely free. It has cost us $0 to become influencers on social media. And when I was recruiting and I ran my recruiting account, I had over 40,000 followers, all from which I created organically. I didn't spend money boosting posts. I didn't spend money making super, digitally enhanced reels. It was all organic content. So that's something that's completely untapped. If you have 10 of us using Instagram, which is free, Jackie and I alone are reaching over 2 to 3 million people a month. That is a huge reach. And I'll caveat that with, if I had any recommendations as to what to spend money on, it'd be creating content. If Jackie and I had a budget of $1,000 a month to create content, or even if you just sent us a couple times every quarter to go participate in a Navy week, or go showcase, what this ship is doing, or anything behind the scenes, that content would create such a large reach. Even now, if Jackie and I photograph a re-enlistment ceremony, we get 5,000 likes, and it was taken in a hallway. So I think if we really had a budget to help create more organic content that's, us going to things, or people that are going to things behind the scenes in the military and showcasing that would really impact a huge audience, and it would cost us little to nothing compared to what a lot of these marketing efforts cost. Jackie?
I'm writing it down.
No, I was actually having this conversation yesterday with the Marine Corps' media and entertainment office, because they were having this conversation of how do we integrate you, because we have all these things we want to show all these communities that Marines don't know about, So I'm like, give me the funding to travel. I want to just be there to create my own content. I'm not going to derail your production of what your agenda is, but just having us there to amplify your message and promote it. That's all what I try to do, especially with doing the speed mentoring series on my Instagram, where I'm getting generals and lieutenant colonels who have very small social media followings. But since I have the platform, I'm having them on my Instagram to amplify them. And in a weird way, I know Kelly was saying earlier that we're not celebrities, but in a weird way, we are recognized. I'm recognized on base by gate guards, by at least 3 times, in Starbucks yesterday, So in a weird way, if recruiting would give us some latitude to be like, hey, we have at MCRD San Diego, at the Recruit Depot, we have a family day. We have, boot camp graduation. We have this. Like, what can you attend? Like, we will get you there. Because it's there's so many amazing events happening. There's so many amazing exercises, so many cool programs. It's just a matter of getting us there to, number one, interact with Marines and have them see us in person. And then number two, to record content in our style and our flavor that we know how to do, and we can provide that service and then amplify it for the masses.
And there are other people out there like Jackie and I doing this, and we follow them and we encourage them. And so, I'm seeing this in the Army. They're starting to hop on board. If the Navy and the Marine Corps could, start building 5-person influencing teams of those who already have platforms, and then use our, tiny budget to ship us out to these different locations, I think that would create waves in the social media presence.
So, sir, I think...
Ma'am, I'm on it.
Sir, I think what they're saying is that you might have some future public affairs officers here.
I'm on it, ma'am.
That is great. I think you got some do-outs there, Admiral. But I'd just like to wrap this up and say thank you all very much for being on this panel. I think this was just a fantastic topic, and really appreciated you all being here today, especially those of you who are here on leave. So thanks all.